Hello from Midori House in London, it's Emma Nelson here. You're listening to Monocle Weekend on the 2nd of March. In a moment we hand to our editorial director Tyler Brûlé, standing by with his panel of guests for a special edition of Monocle on Sunday, examining and exploring the last 48 hours events in the world. And then in a little while at 11am, Robert Bound will be hearing from a selection of nominees for this year's Academy Awards. So lots to look forward to. First though, a summary of the headlines. European leaders will gather at a summit in London today to discuss efforts to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. The meeting has taken on added significance following President Zelensky's blazing row with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance at the White House. Mr. Zelensky received a warm welcome from the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday. Today, he will hold a meeting with King Charles. Israel says it's accepted a Trump administration proposal for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish Passover holiday. The announcement came as the first phase of a ceasefire agreed by Israel and Hamas was due to expire without there being a deal on the second phase. The Pope is reportedly in a stable condition in hospital. The Vatican said the Pontiff is 88, is in good humour and has been given extra oxygen to help with his breathing. A series of train robberies has been carried out across the west of the United States, resulting in the theft of millions of dollars worth of leisure wear. Thieves used bolt cutters to break open container locks and go to work, taking up to $2 million worth of Nike merchandise from trains. And a tarantula has attacked an airline pilot during takeoff. The Iberia Airlines Airbus A320 bound for Düsseldorf was about to take off from Madrid airport. The pilot screamed when he felt pain, but maintained the controls while the co-pilot quickly took charge. The co-pilot then noticed a spider was crawling up his colleague's arm and tried to crush it using one of the flight manuals. The passengers were not informed. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. We cross now live to Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich to join our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, for what we believe to be quite a special extended version of Monocle on Sunday. A very good morning to you, Tyler. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, Emma. Of course, a lot to discuss on the programme today, but of course, off the back of that last story, Juliet is wondering, yes, the tarantula was crawling up the arm, but where did the bite occur?
I think it was on the hand.
We think it was on the hand.
We believe it was on the hand, Juliet, so don't worry. But don't worry, it got it with a flight manual, and they're hefty tomes.
They're big and heavy, aren't they?
I didn't know they had flight manuals. I thought everything was on a tablet in the cockpit
Paper
now.
is back.
And anyway, listen, very quickly, Emma, how's the mood in London this morning? Of course, we're watching various monitors on here in the studio. We've got Keir Starmer on the BBC this morning. Going to be a rather busy day in London.
It's going to be a very busy day because the spotlight firmly is shone on London to see whether the United Kingdom can step up and be this great bridge that everybody is suggesting that they can, because Donald Trump doesn't like Europe very much. He likes the United Kingdom. So this is what Keir Starmer can do. The thing that everybody's getting excited about is the fact that Zelensky will go and see the King this afternoon. And that suddenly starts to introduce all manner of diplomatic sensitivities, given the fact that Donald Trump has just been offered a second state visit to the UK.
Indeed. Listen, we have so much to discuss today. We're just going to get on with it. No more small talk. Emma will talk to you in about 26 minutes' time. Monocle on Sunday starts now. Good morning from Zurich. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Tyler Brûlé. Coming up on today's programme, a lot to discuss. Juliet Linley's here, Eemeli, Isoaho, also Rob Cox. Everybody's in the house. Juliet, I'm going to start you. I'll come to Rob next. Good morning.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. What do we want to talk about today? We could be in the Vatican,
yes,
but we're not. Maybe we'll be later in the show. Let's see. But where do you want to start?
Well, yeah, it's been over 2 weeks that we've been on papal death/funeral/conclave watch. Where are we now with the Pope's health? And do we know the difference between like a Camerlengo and the Dean of the College of Cardinals. We've got to know that. Conclave, by the way, is up for Oscars tonight.
I know it is. Also, Rob Cox here from Rome as well. Great to have you around the
Pleasure
table.
to be here.
Maybe we should jump back to Washington for a moment. What do we want to discuss today?
The Oscars, no doubt. Will it be Dior or Valentino that takes the night?
Could be.
I mean, clearly, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, you have this giant rupture in the West. We saw it all on display in sort of the, Real Housewives of Washington, D.C. at the Oval Office on Friday. The whole world is sort of jaw dropped. Nobody knows quite sure how to react, and I'm actually curious to see how markets start to take this in the next couple of days.
Absolutely. Also, I should probably warn all of our listeners, we might go for an extended program today because we have so much to unpack. Let's head over to Ljubljana.
I'm Monocle's man in the Balkans, Guy de Launey. I'll be joining you from Slovenia, which is currently carnival crazy, but suffering woe in the snow. And there's news of a revival for Tito's favourite holiday spot.
Plus, we'll speak to our Natalie Theodosi in Milan. She's there for Fashion Week. We'll also be getting the latest from our Chris Lord. It's the 2nd of March, 2025, live from Zurich. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from Zurich, this is Monocle on Sunday with Tyler Brûlé.
Good morning from Zurich, where we have a rather, I would say, lively studio space here at Dufourstrasse 90. Great to see regular faces that haven't been around the table for a while. Eemeli Isoaho is here, of course, program coordinator for peace mediation at Eteha in Zurich. How perfect that you're here this morning. Good morning.
Yeah, tell me about it. Good morning. Good to be back here. No, I do feel like I have a bit of a split personality these days. On the one hand, the days are getting longer here in Zurich and we're gearing up for spring. On the other hand, if you look at the headlines from the Middle East to Ukraine, things aren't as bright and sunny. So just Friday, I was having early dinner with friends, and then of course we all stopped having dinner at some point and we're glued to our screens watching what's happening in the White House. So a lot going on, but good to be here.
Yes, also going to be talking to our Andrew Tuckers in London. He'll be joining us in a moment. Also our Chris Lord, also our former US editor, will also be joining us. But in the meantime, speaking of sort of sunniness and brighter days, Juliet Linley is here, whacking her glasses on. Good morning. Nice to see you. Looking in a bit of just for our this is radio, so I have to sort of paint a picture. Tiroler mode as well, looking very, very nice in your sort of semi-young. I do. I love Tracht.
And your lederhosen are looking rather cute.
My lederhosen, yeah.
Thanks for showing us your ankles.
Exactly. Good morning.
Morning. So,
as we said in the menu, we'll probably talk a little bit, of course, about the Vatican today. Emma just said in the news headlines, the Pope is in, he's lucid. He's on extra oxygen. We're not sure what that means. But how much can you sort of decode? Because we should also say you are a former Vatican correspondent. So when you sort of hear what is being released by the Vatican PR machine, how much of it needs a bit of extra spin to it?
Well, there you go. You know, on the one hand, there are those that say he's stable, he's had a tranquillo night, and then he's dead. Like, they're not going to give you that much more information. However, Friday, they gave us this information about how he had a bronchial spasm and then he vomited. A lot of
too much information for a Sunday morning program. Do we want to know
about the Pope puking? Not that much. So you can read in as much as you want to read in, but essentially, he's not doing as badly as everyone thought. And, you know, conspiracies started flying as of St. Valentine's Day when he was hospitalized. And then just last week, 2 Vatican officials entered the Gemelli Hospital, Rome's largest hospital where the Pope has been for over 2 weeks. And when the Vatican press office were pressed to give information as to what they were doing, they said, it was about the upcoming decisions on future cardinals. But then if you look into who those 2 were, they have nothing to do with cardinals. So everyone's thinking, are they going to try to get him to resign? You know, Benedict opened the gates to the resignation option. And I mean, Rob, who's coming from Rome, he's probably hearing even more about all these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, Rob Cox, also with I don't know if this is a new title, but you're CEO of Frontward Strategic Communications. I mean, this sounds almost menacing. and
well,
rather
the opposite
global.
of backwards. So
right.
I figured I'd call my little shop Frontwards.
I like it.
Simple. It's also the name of a great Pavement song, but that's besides the point.
Rob, tell us if you are and you're visiting us from Rome this morning. But if you're in Rome and you're just, of course, around the corner from the Vatican, Is this a story which is front and center, or it's one of those things which is just happening anyway in Italy? And oftentimes that proximity issue, it's bigger on the world stage than it might be if I was picking up Corriere della Sera, if I was turning on the news headlines on Rai.
No, I actually find that you feel it. It's everywhere. It sort of permeates all the discussions you see in all the newspaper headlines. Now, of course, if you're a tourist and you're not looking at anything that's local, you wouldn't note it. But as someone who's there living it, you certainly see, and it actually becomes a little, can I say, infectious. You said at the outset that's sort of like, I don't know, Pope death watch, but you do sort of feel like, how's the Pope doing? And then for certain things like, if you're trying to plan an event that might have the international press involved, you just have to assume they're all completely obsessed with the papal health watch. Let's call it that way. But it is, to your point a bit, there is a lot of transparency. And I was curious about this. Maybe you've covered this in the past, but, every day there's like doctors coming out and saying, and he had a good night's sleep. He sat up while he had his breakfast. Like, okay, great to know. You were sitting up while he had his breakfast. He ate
drinking coffee.
They don't tell you about bowel movements or anything like that, but there's a excruciating amount of details into the health. I'm sure, back in, Pope Innocent VI or whoever it was.
Yeah, they weren't on social media even, imagine.
Arsenic down into his coffee and, who knows. But, it does seem like there is a level of transparency here, which...
And to your point about the tourists getting there, they actually would see all these people praying and putting candles for the Pope outside the hospital, but also at St. Peter's, cardinals leading prayer sessions. So it is a big deal. I have friends constantly messaging me, how is he?
They think you've got the inside track.
Yeah, which we do.
Let's go over to London. Andrew Tuck, our editor-in-chief, is there. Andrew, as I was saying a little bit earlier, we're actually just watching right now. The Prime Minister is talking to Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC right now, quite a probably significant sit-down in what is going to be a very busy day for Europe, and with London also hosting, of course, many European leaders, also Canada, also joining in London for these talks today as well. And good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Tyler. Yeah, what a couple of days. And one of those strange moments in political history which jumps out of our world into everyone's world. Because yesterday, as I was walking around the city, I heard people talking about it outside cafes. I walked past a couple who were talking about it. It's been an extraordinary moment of optics, of policy being unpacked in front of our eyes. So yes, both, but it's going to be interesting today because what's the positive thing is, the people coming to London, I think they do, most of the leaders coming today, they do have some shared belief that we need to stand by Ukraine as Europe. Viktor Orban isn't coming, Robert Fico isn't coming, so they have a chance at some kind of consensus. And Starmer is in a good position after his trip to Washington, where he managed to go into that bear pit and come out alive.
Maybe, Rob, let's just go back to you. It's almost one of those where were you moments when, of course, all of this happened. Eemeli, you said, of course, you were at dinner, everybody then sort of, firing up their screens, watching Desi, our producer here. I think everyone was having sort of, lit Friday afternoon cocktails upstairs in the office here. And then all eyes, of course, moved to the screens as this was happening. It's a big question, Rob, but your read on this, and maybe the first question, clearly this didn't happen by chance.
No, Trump won the ratings. Like, this is what he does. This is his mode. We are in an attention society. That is the greatest, I don't know, commodity or whatever you call it. He absolutely got it. We're talking about it everywhere. And as you said, as Andrew said, people on the streets and cafes, not just in the UK, all around the world, this is the subject, right? So, well done. You won. Ratings game for the next couple of days. J.D. Vance emerged as the attack dog we thought he might be. That you go to Yale Law School, you do learn, I guess, how to debate. So he certainly came in there. Now, what it means for the alliance, if you want to put it that way, is it's thunderingly chaotic. It creates great disorder, but it also creates this moment. Like, so we already had it with the Munich Security Conference when J.D. Vance sort of laid down the gauntlet. You now see, as you said, Keir Starmer's, there's going to be a moment where someone steps up here. I think you wrote it in your column, like, where is that person? And we are going to have to see that. Now we have the next couple of days, we'll see European leaders. Like, there is a moment, and whether it's Giorgia Meloni or Emmanuel Macron, someone who can be the Trump whisperer, someone who's going to have to do that. It does feel like it's going to be very difficult for Volodymyr Zelensky to to be to have this conversation. The negotiation is going to have to take place, I believe. I mean, you are the expert on this, so I'd love to hear your view. But like, it almost seems like you're not going to be able to put these kids in a room and come out with any kind of solution. The question is, who does? Who is the proxy? Who is the person who can do that?
Eemeli, over to Mr. Mediation.
Well, no, that's a golden question. No, just to first of all agree that I think it was a complete failure of diplomacy on Friday. But as Trump said himself, it's going to be great for television. So I think they were communicating to different audiences. But of course, being crammed in a small room in front of different media outlets is not a conducive environment for any solution-oriented talks. I would be looking at London, of course, also Brussels. There's a summit of the European Council happening on Sunday. I would agree with a lot of European leaders who say this is Europe's time to kind of step up their game, not only in terms of political and military support for Ukraine, but being professional about what kind of a framework might we need for a peace process. And I was yesterday listening to a long interview with the president of Finland, Alex Stubb, and he, as he was going to London, getting ready to board his plane, he proposed 3 phases. One was to really think of, even before we have ceasefire talks, what can we do in the immediate. One is to support Ukraine politically, militarily, but at the same time exert even bigger pressure on Russia, be it increased sanctions or even using some of their frozen assets and preparing for very credible security guarantees. And it's only then that we might be able to have some kind of a ceasefire in place, and that is not, as we know, is not going to solve the conflict. And I think there's been a kind of an ad hoc effort to get to agreements left, right and center without thinking about the bigger context. And you need to have a big framework for such a talks, and I would imagine you need various tracks. It's such a complex context. You will need a Ukraine-Russia track in terms of border demarcation, in terms of practical ceasefire parameters, but you will need a track for conversations between Europe and Ukraine on security guarantees, EU relations, and you will most definitely need higher level conversations between Washington and Moscow in terms of NATO-Russia relations and other. So you will need a complex peace process, but I think it's now time for Europe, and hopefully today and Thursday, to get serious about it by putting forward practical solution-oriented proposals rather than just talking the talk rather than walking the walk.
Our executive editor, actual former U.S. editor, Chris Lord, is standing by London. But Chris, we'll come to you in a second. Rob, I just want to ask you, though, when we sort of look at this, and part of this is also now who's going to host this too. There is where is the conversation going to happen? Are we back in Washington, or is that also, when we sort of look at what was maybe been a bit of a loss now for the U.S. in terms of convening something, maybe this moves elsewhere?
Well, where are we right now? We're in the place, normally in the past, this would be Switzerland's moment to shine. This would be a place to sort of on a more neutral basis have people come in here from all sides and feel like they can get into this process of mediation. I mean, having done the beginning of it in Saudi Arabia feels like it was a sort of ratings measure. It was a way to troll
How's that
Europe.
Construction on the line coming along? That's what they wanted.
Well, I bet it was a way to troll Europe in a sense.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're going to do it there. Now, maybe there is this moment. I guess the one thing where I keep coming, we say Europe. I don't think that there's that old Kissinger apocryphal thing is like get Europe on the phone. They're like, well, who's that? And I still wonder who is able to have that conversation with. You saw that again, Starmer and Macron went into the Oval Office, did exactly what Zelensky, for whatever reason, didn't do, which was basically kiss up and sort of say, that diplomatic dance, let's call it that, with Trump, that didn't occur. They know how to do it. They know how to whisper him. I mean, I keep going back to Giorgia Meloni. She's a bit of a Trump whisperer. Someone who can pull that. So when we say Europe, I think we can't have 26, 27 people talking this. We need to have somebody who can say, look, we're going to bring it to Lago di Como, and we're going to have this group.
Bellagio.
Yeah, and I think you'll need different roles. I think Giorgia Meloni absolutely, in trying to bring the allies together, absolutely makes sense. Turkey, they've going into London, again, offering, as they hosted the Black Sea Grain Initiative, wanting to have that role again, whether that's realistic or not, we can have a conversation about that. BRICS countries, there are other non-European states that might serve this rather the low-powered hosting responsibility. I don't see a role for someone to really get in between Washington and Moscow in terms of really calling the shots between, but rather providing a platform. And that is different from a role of unifying Europe, and Meloni and others are trying to do that.
Chris Lord, I don't want to take bets on this, but if you had to say who's going to not just put up their hand, but who's going to be endorsed as well from the European side to lead this, any guesses?
Look, I think what's happening today in London with the meeting of the various European leaders right here in London is substantial. And the reason I think that's important is Starmer seems to be one of the very few leaders in and around Europe who's willing to kind of get real on the situation. I think there's a lot of people still attached in European capitals to an old way of doing business with the White House and how to deal with them. He seems to have woken up, and look at some of the briefing that's around today. There's some lines around suggesting that he's going to tell European leaders in London today that what Ukraine needs now is guns and butter. It doesn't need people tweeting and virtue signaling. And I do think that is a fact of what's going on here. He has recognized that there is a completely different mode of how to deal with the White House, but you need them on side and you need to work. Peace is going to have to come through the White House in some way to settle what's happening there in Ukraine. When you hear the Chancellor-in-Waiting Merz in Germany talking about, independence, achieving a kind of degree of independence from the US, I think they're right in the sense that they certainly need to up their defense budgets to start negotiating with Trump on a more even footing. But the idea that they can cut the US out in some way and try and sort of settle this themselves is fantasy. And I think, look, whoever can get their head around that soonest, whether that's Meloni or indeed whether Starmer can bring more people into that view, until that happens, we're going to see more of these big dust-ups like we saw on Friday night.
Andrew, just want to maybe rewind a couple of weeks ago. We were at the World Government Summit in Dubai. We were reflecting there just, of course, how the order has changed. Even, Rob just, of course, hinting at who can convene these things. Here you have, of course, the UAE playing a role. Obviously, there was across the border in Saudi, of course, there was a small moment as well. A lot of what we've been hearing, of course, is about this realignment of the world. Do we start to see also the Gulf players really almost a bit of a wild card also emerge in all of this? When you look, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, the amount of money that the UAE is investing in technology, the amount of money that they've thrown at France and Italy, for example, and how that might stack up.
Well, the interesting thing about the UAE is that all sides seem to like going there. The Americans like the UAE because it's conservative. It's about money. They don't have any territorial ambitions. The Russians like going there because the same. They can do business. They don't pay tax. Many people have gone there during the war, and there's a lot of Ukrainians there as well. And people know to shut up and just focus on getting business done. And it's interesting to see how many people have been going via the UAE and Riyadh in recent weeks, and many of these conversations, not just the ones that have been public, have been taking place there. So I think they do have a role to play. And also it's interesting, I think, Tyler, there's so many important things to remember here. That when Trump's belief is this war cannot be won. And I think that in Europe, there's a realization that the Ukrainians are not going to take back Ukraine. But nobody knows where to begin this process. And this notion that the talks are going to be long-winded, complex, multiple players is just not in Trump's manner to do those kind of things. He likes quick, fast, single deals with an individual person. And that's what appeals to him about talking to Putin. So it's great to hear all these processes that we need to be put in place for it to really happen. But you just wonder whether the man's got the stamina for that. He's not his modus operandi. So I think it's an interesting, scary moment. But I think what's also positive, and which everyone has been hinting at, is it could be a moment where Europe finally starts spending the right amount of money on its defence, where it gets its economies back in order, where the UK stops bickering with the EU and comes together around defence and economy and supporting Ukraine. Because that's the other last tiny point, Tyler, before I pass back to you, is that actually the media here, certainly in the UK today, even the media on the right who's supportive of Trump, is saying, don't let him bully you, stand up against Russia. The Ukraine cause is a good one, and this is our moment to come together and do something important.
Chris Lord, let's just jump to the other side of the Atlantic. this morning, of course, now we've seen a lot of reactions, not just from more moderate Republicans, of course, certainly from Democrats as well. But there's really been sort of a cattle call of sentiment, and I'm wondering, what are you reading in terms of is half of America sort of have sort of head in hands, or this is just the new order of the day, and this is what people are to expect, and maybe not so much surprise or even embarrassment potentially.
Well, look, reading around the American Sunday papers this morning, just as they start to come out, look, there is obviously a groundswell of and from quite sort of predictable wings of the media about, this is a travesty and this is a sort of disaster, and Trump sort of pivoting away from old allies in favor of Putin. There was one headline that said Vance helped Putin directly with J.D. Vance, that'd be the vice president, in the way that he was kind of carping a bit from the sidelines of that conversation and that argument between Donald Trump and Zelensky. But between all that as well, amongst the papers, what you do find is there is a degree of people saying that, in a way, certainly from media that's a little bit more friendly to Donald Trump, saying that he has a political mandate to send Zelensky away empty-handed here. There's a line from Fox this morning that Zelensky came looking for a blank check and was rightly rebuffed. Now, that might seem, it's so hard sitting here in London to sort of look back to the US and sort of think, how can that, when we see such a kind of breakdown of conversation that is acceptable. But one of the things that struck me when I was in the US for 3 years is that, Zelensky didn't play quite the same way over there as he did in Europe. There was lots of people, certainly who I spoke to, who frankly didn't completely buy into him. They didn't completely buy into him as a leader. They supported the Ukrainians in their fight for sovereignty and self-determination. But Zelensky as a character, as a figurehead, didn't quite always land so well. And, even just during the big dust-up on Friday, you had a journalist sort of shouting from the press pool, why don't you wear a suit? Why aren't you wearing a suit? These kind of things do play in a certain way with the American public. And that is a little bit, I think, some of the discourse that you can find in the papers that, when Donald Trump returned to power in November, at the vote in November, when he sits there and says, the previous administration gave you $350 billion at a moment when Americans are seeing price rises, they feel that their pocketbooks are getting lighter and they're not seeing their personal means improve. That is very, very powerful. And so, while yes, that was shocking what happened on Friday night, there's more of a political mandate than we think in that country for him, frankly, being as dismissive of Zelensky as he was.
Chris Lord-in-law, we're going to have to let you go. But Rob, do you want to pick up on that?
I think there is a lot of history to think about between Donald Trump's base and Zelensky. So you can go back to the OG Russia collusion, the call that he made to Zelensky. This was front and center as part of it. So he is not viewed him as a friend. Not, we know all politics is personal with Donald Trump. So this isn't about what America. This is about that guy. He screwed me at some point. I don't like him. And then J.D. Vance gave the most obvious tell. The greatest tell of all time in diplomacy when he said, oh, you were there supporting the, quote, opposition during the campaign because Zelensky had gone with Joe Biden to Scranton, Pennsylvania, to an armaments factory during the campaign. Now, I might say that was ill-advised. I mean, I'm not sure that was a really good. I can see, though, of course, why he would have preferred Joe Biden or Kamala Harris was pretty obviously on display here. But I mean, so there is this history that goes back in that element, and then there is a third of the American populace that is going to just take the talking points. He didn't wear a suit. He disrespected whatever it is, whatever comes through, whether it's any of the channels that are friendly to Fox, including the guy who yelled that question about the suit, who comes from like some Real American Network or something like that. So that third is unchanged. The real question is whether that 20% that was kind of in the middle that voted for Trump, how they feel, and I mean we'll see that in the approval ratings over the next couple weeks. We'll also see it in the marketplace over the next, this is not good. These are not good headlines if you own stocks and bonds and you want some predictability. And
And just quickly before we go back to London for the news, Rob, of course, we'll see the Tokyo markets. Australia will open first. How much does this impact what's happening on, let's say, in the APAC world versus it's going to have a very different moment when the CAC 40 opens in European markets? What do you think we're going to see?
Look, I mean, they're always trying to, the traders there are going to look at, they're trying to be a proxy for what the rest of the world, this is a mood question, right? How do you feel? Can you, if you own a business, feel comfortable, confident, make plans, project out in the future, given the disorder that you're seeing at these levels? And, we've already had it with tariffs and others. I'm not saying it's going to crash. I mean, this all, we would have seen it over the weekend, like indications, but it is just it's another pull out of the Jenga piece, right? Like that says, this is precarious. We're at the highest valuations we've been practically ever. It doesn't take much.
No. It's just 18:30 in Tokyo. It's 17:30 in Hong Kong. It's 10:30 here in Zurich and Milan. We're going to be heading to Milan in a moment. Coming up in the next half hour as well, we're going to be talking to our Guy de Launey. Andrew Tuck, our editor-in-chief, is also in London. Stick around because I think one thing we do have to, of course, discuss when we go to Milan to talk to our fashion editor in a moment. I mean, is this whole idea of appearances. And there's this moment sort of lingering in the background about, of course, when Zelensky got out of his SUV as well, the Trump saying, great to see that you got dressed up for this as well. There's something sort of really lingering there. But we'll be talking about that in a moment. Emma Nelson is back in London with the news headlines.
Very much indeed, Tyler. European leaders will gather at a summit in London today to discuss efforts to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky received a warm welcome from Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and today he holds a meeting with King Charles. Israel says it's accepted a Trump administration proposal for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. It will last for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish Passover holiday. The Vatican has issued its morning health update on the Pope. The 88-year-old pontiff is stable, on oxygen, alert, in good humour and resting following a peaceful night. And people living near to Land's End in the UK have been advised to buy earplugs due to a lighthouse's broken fog alarm. Longship's lighthouse has been sounding a loud beep every 13 seconds for the past week. The National Coastwatch Institution has said the horn has been sounding all day and all night. One tourist described it as the noisiest sunset he'd ever seen. And those are the headlines. Back to you, Tyler, in Zurich.
Emma, do we have any audio of that? Or maybe I'll set you a challenge. I want to hear this. So at some point over the next 28 minutes or so, maybe we can hear what's happening down at Land's End. We're going to head to Milan right now. Our Natalie Theodosi is there, our fashion director, of course, covering the shows. Good morning, Natalie.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well. Kalimera. Very nice to hear you this morning. Listen, why don't we just stay on the theme from Washington for a moment? I want to bring everybody in. Maybe Andrew, I'll start with you. As I said, there's this sort of lingering moment. Of course, we have a question sort of fired out from the gathered media in the Oval Office. We had this dig by President Trump when Zelensky was getting out of the vehicle. Great to see that you got dressed up. So here's my question: Rob is also sort of or Chris, I should say, was sort of suggesting when you look back also at maybe how America felt about Zelensky in the early days. You also have to look back at also before he went into his fatigue sweatshirt, and he looked like a croupier in a not great casino, oftentimes looking like a bit of a spiv. So the question is here: maybe he is better off in sort of his version of battle fatigues. Andrew, do appearances matter in this? And maybe why did it irk the White House? And Andrew's pondering that while he maybe looks for something in his wardrobe. Juliet, I'll throw it over. You step in.
I mean, yes, it's a bit like you're going to visit the great aunt whose Hermes handbag you'd really like to inherit, and she likes to dress properly in a blouse. Just do it. No, honestly, and he's not even wearing monocle navy blue. He's wearing full black, which is not even combat
we're very well. He does olive sometimes as well, which is a house color of ours.
It shows his buff biceps. No, anyway, going back to that. I mean, seriously, Rob, we talked about it. Like, should he have just worn it?
It's just solidarity with the front line. I mean, I don't think. Look, he obviously was, as you say, sartorially challenged for much of his for early part of his tenure. He's now found like a wardrobe.
His groove works for him.
It's his groove. He's doing it in solidarity, he says, with the people who are fighting.
Pick your battles.
Eemeli, I mean, listen, when it comes to mediation, oftentimes we've talked about the importance of food around the table, but also the importance of also showing up and making an effort. And as Rob was saying, that is his version, showing solidarity, making an effort on behalf of, not just the Ukrainian people, but also, of course, maybe Europe. It's signaling in a variety of formats. But what's your take?
I mean, absolutely. There's the kind of optics of it showing that I'm a leader of a country in war. But I mean, the risk there is that you're not seeing the forest for the trees, that you are focusing on insignificant issues. So you could say, and that's why you have protocol, for instance, in diplomatic engagement. So focus is ideally on substance rather than what happens around it. But at the same time, I would come back to your kind of Real Housewives reference, Rob, in the beginning. It felt like I was watching The Boardroom in The Apprentice. It was about belittling 100%. One of the contestants and showing you're a tough guy, you're a tough leader. And you see that in the memes, even from President Trump's sons coming out after Friday's meeting, that are really not using nice rhetoric about what went on. And really the focus was on showing that President Trump is a strong man and he's in the lead. The positive framing, I think, is he's a transactional negotiator. So I think if there's something for him to get out of maintaining a relationship with Zelensky in the future, he will do it. And I think that's why Rutte of NATO was emphasizing being adamant, a bit different from other European leaders, that, hey, Zelensky, you need to, re-nurture this relationship with Trump. And I think it can come around. There's a lot of work in between, but it's not impossible either because he's a transactional guy.
Okay, so Natalie in Milan, here's an assignment for you in terms of a lot of work. Okay, women's shows are on right now. We've been talking, of course, about the importance of the U.S. economy, really the sort of the swing away from China. Of course, a lot of the luxury houses, the major groups know that they really have to focus on the world's biggest economy, the U.S., and the U.S. has been doing, of course, incredibly well. It's very important, obviously, to the major luxury goods companies, and of course, certainly in Washington, we've seen a new type of power dressing. We've seen, of course, when we look at so many of the women, of course, within this administration right now, it is hair, it is lips, it is a certain silhouette. So I'm wondering as well, perhaps a little bit cynically, but what have you been seeing in showrooms, certainly on runways as well in Milan? Is there any nod to that in terms of the theatrics that are happening in Washington?
It's interesting you say that, Tyler, because it's true. I think there's been two different responses to everything that's happening in the world. And one of them is exactly that. It is back to that very more traditional approach to dressing for women, which is the big lips, the hair. The 80s are back, and we've seen them a lot in Milan. But then there's designers like Miuccia Prada, who's a little bit more intellectual on her take, and then when she looks at what's happening in the world, and she was saying backstage after her show that her response is to offer a slightly more undone look so that women can move freely. So you had something that was quite elegant, but the hair was undone. It was loafers and flat shoes on the runways, and you had this paperback waist, which was a little bit more free moving. So different designers are responding in different ways, but very much in many cases, it is back to the 80s and that big power suit and then the hair and the lips.
Rob was just talking a little bit earlier about what we might expect with the markets opening up, but when we also have to think, the impact when we look at, of course, some of the major luxury goods houses, which are publicly traded. What's the sentiment, Natalie? Is it a sort of mood of optimism there when you've been visiting brands? Just the spirit of what you're seeing, of course, again on display. Is this a joyous? Maybe somewhat almost triumphant world at the moment. What's the prevailing mood?
I think in combination of everything that's going on economically and politically, and also the internal, we've spoken on the show before, there's so many HR changes within the fashion world, creative directors leaving, their CEOs going on a hunt to hire the new people. It's actually a little bit of confusion, I found, especially in Milan. But what is interesting, speaking especially of the US, a lot of especially the smaller brands in showrooms, which are a lot more focused on a specific category or a product, they are quite optimistic. They are saying that they have seen enormous sales growth in the US, maybe not so much from the traditional department stores that they would usually do business with. Saks and Neiman Marcus are now in the midst of this quite messy merger. They're kind of owning a lot of brands' money, but direct-to-consumer sales from the U.S. customers are growing a lot. Everyone's saying how robust that market is despite the political turmoil. So in that sense, there is optimism that there's going to be recovery in the industry very soon.
And just, you've been commenting on this as well. It was one of your columns last week, Natalie, which was really looking at, are we also moving towards a single fashion capital? Because, of course, we've seen Copenhagen throwing a lot of money at emerging designers. Is London going to bounce back properly? Does it even matter? New York's got to get it into the groove. Right now, it is really Milan and Paris that are holding things up. You could say globally for the industry.
Absolutely.
Is Milan? I was just going to say, are they that sense of sort of also fighting back, trying to put on a better show, as you said, but things might be a little bit confused as well?
I think Milan is in a transition with, I think Gucci, Bottega Veneta, some of its core brands are missing creative directors. They're in a transition. So actually the last 2 seasons in Milan have been a little bit quieter, and it all seems to come together in Paris. So a lot of buyers and editors as well just kind of save their budgets and spend 10 days in Paris where everyone gets together. They can go and see the shows, but they can meet everyone at showrooms and do business as well. So yeah, I think it has turned into a bit of a battle of the cities, and a lot of the conversations are about what is going to happen. I think Milan will definitely bounce back, but for smaller cities like London, New York, Copenhagen as well, there needs to be a much more concentrated effort, I think, to bring them back with funds, with support of local talent, and just creative ways to make the runways more interesting and to give people reason to come back, because at the end of the day, you do need to have a business case to travel to these fashion weeks.
Just before we go, if you could identify a bag, a pair of loafers, a full ensemble that stood out. 3 highlights so far out of Milan. Emerging brands, established. What have you liked?
So I would say that Tod's is an interesting one to watch. It's an ex-Bottega Veneta designer called Matteo Tamburini has really been reviving the brand, and I would definitely look at his leather dresses and outerwear. There's a new brand called Armarium, which is growing quite interestingly. Again, very chic wardrobe classics, and they've just launched jewelry, so I would recommend that. And maybe Fendi as well, which was one of the highlights of the season, given that Silvia Venturini Fendi designed for the first time women's and menswear. It was all a celebration of its 100 years. So the shearling coats and her bags were real collector's items this season.
Natalie Theodosi, our fashion director in Milan, thank you very, very much for that. We're going to head to Ljubljana in a moment to talk to Guy de Launey. Julie, I saw you nodding a lot there. Shearling, you got excited about shearling coats, didn't you? Or was it leather dresses?
Or maybe it was the Tod's leather dresses. We all used to wear Tod's, I feel like, a decade ago with the little bubbly rubber soles.
The little gumino,
They're fuddy-duddy.
They're fuddy-duddy.
So I'm happy to hear that now Natalie is saying that it's made a comeback, because loafers and dresses, not a good look.
No.
But I'm hoping that, the leather dress thing, maybe high heels.
But listen, we've talked about this before. It is amazing, though, how these certain codes, these looks, we've been talking about uniforms, that sort of, that gomino and,
remember?
It also doesn't, but Rob, it doesn't go away. There's so many things
Rob
in Italy I can't see Rob in a gomino loafer, but maybe he has one, and maybe he likes a driving shoe. I don't know. They're driving shoes. But, there's these things that endure, though, in Italy, right? That, they may not be wearing them in Dallas anymore or in Osaka, but they're still loving it.
The quilted jackets, certain things that you just, I remember seeing those when I was 25 or 22, first went to Italy, and they're still there. But
you swore you'd never wear one, and you're wearing one today, Rob.
No, he's not. He's got like a gilet, but it's not quilted.
It's an Italian gilet, I will say, but it's made of nylon, so...
Listen, why don't we head over to Ljubljana right now? Our Balkans correspondent, Guy de Launey, is there. Guy, good morning.
Good morning, Thailand. Good morning, everyone.
So, Guy, we have to start to go a little bit off script, but stay on script as well, which is, reaction. If we were looking at the papers from across the region, if I was, going to, the major dailies or the major outlets in Serbia, Croatia, what's the response to, of course, what we've seen and what is unfolding, or what unfolded, of course, in Washington, but also, of course, what is happening in London today as well?
Well, you wouldn't be surprised to find there's a couple of outliers in this region.
Oh, really?
Which it covers 8 different countries. So, I mean, as you'd expect, Croatia, Slovenia, they're very supportive of Volodymyr Zelensky, very much in favour of European unity and supporting Ukraine. But you have interesting exceptions in Serbia, where Aleksandar Vučić is treading the usual fine line on the knife edge between the West and the East. And Mr. Vučić, I think it's fair to say, has been looking forward to Mr. Trump taking power because he thinks it will be a good thing in terms of Serbia's ongoing conflict with Kosovo. And when I say conflict, I mean the one which is political and diplomatic rather than an actual military conflict. But he knows last time round that Mr. Trump and his staff were a lot more supportive to Belgrade than they were to Pristina in terms of the normalization efforts that have been going on. So we've seen Mr. Vučić talking about how he's afraid for Mr. Trump in terms of what the Europeans will do, how they will react, how they will talk about him, how Mr. Trump is going to have to withstand a barrage of criticism from Europe, which is a very interesting thing for the president of a country which is deep into EU accession negotiations to be saying. But it's the kind of thing we've come to expect from Serbia. Meanwhile, if you look over in Bosnia, Milorad Dodik, the Bosnian Serb leader, has been wandering around with a MAGA hat on for weeks now. And he's just been convicted on Wednesday of ignoring the decisions of the International High Representative. He has responded by praising Mr. Trump to the high heavens. The US Embassy has come out and said, "We utterly condemn what you have done. We utterly condemn laws which you have tried to pass, moving Republika Srpska, the Bosnian Serb region, away from the Bosnian state. The State Department has condemned you as well. Don't try and get wise with us, fella," to put it in the vernacular.
Just maybe as a side note, of course, this is a region you've been covering for a long time. Everyone would like to see, of course, peace in the region. But when you're looking at nations that are really on the doorstep, they're properly adjacent, the bump, the economic bump that will potentially come, of course, if peace does reign, is it going to be immediate? And I guess what I'm getting at as well, have we seen a lot of Ukrainians, setting up shop, working out of cafes? Do you see a lot of Ukrainian license plates, in the region? Because of course we know it's happening in many other places around the world. As Andrew said earlier, you only have to go to Dubai, you only have to drive around Zürich, etc. But when you think about the immediate neighborhood, what could the impact be when we look at something that resembles peace?
Well, my neighbourhood around here, in Ljubljana, yes, I see Ukraine license plates on a regular basis. Not necessarily every day, but regularly I see Ukraine license plates. My children have been at school with children from both Russia and Ukraine, which has made for interesting situations from time to time because, people were either already here because Slovenia was friendly with both Russia and Ukraine. But of course, other people have joined since the conflict started. And there are people who have a certain amount of trauma who've been at my children's schools. And that's been an interesting situation for them to face. If you go to Belgrade, though, Serbia's capital, the situation there has been much more interesting because Serbia, because of its very strong relations with Russia, allows visa-free entry for people from Russia. It's also very friendly with Ukraine. So you've had both Ukrainians and Russians coming in very large numbers into Belgrade. And when I say large numbers, I mean tens of thousands. And they've been setting up businesses, setting up cultural events. You can go around Belgrade now and you can go to Russian or Ukrainian bars and restaurants, you can go to music nights, but there's also been a big impact in terms of business where a lot of Russian software developers have set up in Belgrade because Belgrade's software sector was developing anyway. And of course, the Russians need to operate internationally and they're able to do that from Belgrade. And we had a story in Monocle about a concert promoter who moved their operations from Moscow to Belgrade and has now become one of the most successful concert promoters in Southeast Europe. So things have changed, and probably changed to some degree irrevocably in the region because of the conflict. Some people, of course, will be very delighted to return to where they've come from in the event of peace. But you've got to remember that a lot of the Russians who moved to Belgrade were moving not just because they could carry on business there, but because they were no fans of Vladimir Putin.
Guy, let's just stay in Serbia for a moment. Student protests on at the moment there. What are the students grumpy about?
Well, it all comes from the collapse of Novi Sad railway station, which was on November the 1st, so 4 months ago yesterday. And just to refresh people's memory, Novi Sad railway station had been recently reopened after a years-long renovation programme because it's part of the government's flagship infrastructure project, and this is the high-speed railway line from Belgrade to Budapest. The canopy at the station collapsed on the 1st of November last year. 15 people died who were underneath it, and there's been an outpouring of anguish, grief and outrage about this, which has simply not subsided, because people are saying, look, if this is one of the government's flagship infrastructure projects and this has happened, what does that say for everything else that's going on in the country? And of course, people suspect corruption. They've been marching for months with banners with red hands on them saying you have blood on your hands and corruption kills. And it's the students who've risen to prominence in this movement, and they've been determinedly apolitical. They've not been allowing the opposition parties, who are somewhat atomized in Serbia, to take any leadership roles in the protests. And they've been getting more and more inventive in the kind of ways in which they've been staging these protests. So what we had, which ended at 3 o'clock in the morning local time in Niš, which is Serbia's third city in southern Serbia. Tens of thousands of people had gathered there. Many of them had marched from different parts of Serbia to be there. And they held an 18-hour protest, blocking off the centre of Niš, in effect, with something of a carnival atmosphere, it has to be said, but also declaring what they called a student edict about the kind of country they wanted Serbia to be, with more accountability, more justice, and more freedom all round.
Guy, let's just end this on a carnival note. I guess things in full swing right now in Slovenia. Give us a bit of a flavour of what's going on.
I love carnival time anywhere. Last year I was in Venice, which is only just up the road from Ljubljana. But it has to be said, Slovenia's not too shabby itself when it comes to carnivals. And the carnival in Putui, which is Slovenia's oldest town and allegedly one of the most difficult for foreigners to pronounce, has made the Lonely Planet Global Top 10 Carnivals list. And it is quite something. I mean, if you've seen the film Midsummer and all the sort of ethnographic rituals displayed therein, Putui is like that on steroids, but maybe minus some of the more bizarre ways of evisceration that are displayed in that film. You basically have a parade of these creatures called kurenti, who are there to... They look sort of... I'm looking at a picture of them now. I'm not quite sure whether they're terrifying or cuddly. They've got that sort of vibe to them. Very large, very furry, horned, but with bells around their waists. And they're meant to scare away the evil spirits of winter. And if you are in Putui for Carentovania, they come through not in their dozens, but in their hundreds, because people come from all over the country who have their little carnival societies, and they will come from all over the country to Putui, and they come from across the region as well. There were groups from Bulgaria, from Croatia, and they join in this carnival parade, which goes on for several hours, but doesn't get boring. And it's a very interesting ritual, and it's repeated in different places around the country. They had it in Ljubljana yesterday on a much smaller scale. But the Slovenians get into this very seriously, and I think it always displays that, you know, despite this being a country of the European Union, it's very much in touch still with its very deep pagan roots, which is quite interesting.
Guy de Launey, our man in the Balkans, our man in Ljubljana. Thank you very much for that. I really need to bring Andrew Tuck in on this. Andrew, hairy, horny, bells around the waist. What's not to like?
No, there's an outfit that perhaps you could wear to the White House.
Exactly. Yeah. Next time you step out of an SUV, that's all you need. I need to do just a very quick poll around the table. I want to pull Emma Nelson in on this as well. Rob, I'll start with you. You're in Rome. Carnivals in general, yes, no. You can sort of observe from the sidelines,
Well, I'm kind of a what is that all about? I mean, I understand it because it's related to, it is paganistic, I'm sure, but it's very much celebrated by people of the Catholic faith because it's an opportunity. Okay, I don't know what Lent is. I don't do it. So for me, every Thursday is Fat Thursday, and every Tuesday is even fatter. So.
More obese.
Eemeli, listen, you're from the land of Moomins and other hairy creatures as well. We won't even talk about what happens in saunas, but are you into? Are you into this carnival thing?
Yeah, I guess the closest you get to a carnival in Finland is Vappu, which is the 1st of May celebrations. But I think I've been Swissified enough, so I've partaken in some. I have friends from Lucerne and Basel, and there's an ever-going debate which one is the real one or the best Fastnacht in Zurich. And I was just showing Juliet that I have a badge or a pin from this year's Basel Fastnacht that was gifted to me by my friend from Basel. So at least I have the attire, but I don't think I will be attending this year.
Emma, over to you. Carnivals. Juliet, I'm coming to you in a second. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Know that I'm actually in full carnival dancing gear at this precise moment. I'm getting the headphones over my feathers, and it's getting in a way. I can't tell you what the tassels are doing. We have it in London. We go bananas, and we have the Notting Hill Carnival, and it becomes a massive security and drugs issue. That's how the Londoners deal with it. But actually, I'm massively with Rob here. That for me on Carnival Day, it's pancakes. That's it. 24 hours, stodge, fat, a bit of cleaning up afterwards, and the feathers.
Okay, Juliet.
Well, speaking of feathers and security issues at Notting Hill, where did Notting Hill originate? Trinidad, and we're under a state of emergency.
Are you still under a state of emergency in Trinidad?
Since mid-January. However, the carnival celebrations will go ahead. The government said so. So we're good. But don't forget to mention, Eemeli, about this lovely brooch, that it does include the Eurovision Song Contest logo, doesn't it? That's what you were telling me.
Oh, they've also incorporated that as well.
Apparently. So I think the main idea is like the organizers, it's also a source of income for them to kind of sell these badges or pins. And this year, it's the shape of a heart, which I think refers to Basel hosting the Eurovisions this year. Again, don't test my knowledge of Basel Fastnacht beyond that, but it's apparently a thing to do.
Andrew, listen, I know when it comes to sort of, feathers, if there's maybe sort of something sitting on the coat stand in a karaoke room, you don't mind sort of throwing that on. Would we see you at a Fastnacht? Do you care about what's happening in Lucerne, Venice, or Basel?
I don't mind watching other people's festivities and carnivals. I certainly don't want to be in one, and I don't want to be trapped in a street rammed with millions of people where I can't escape and I have to drink alcohol from a plastic beaker. So it depends.
Yes. It maybe. Yes, it sounds like you want a sort of a nice perch on a balcony. I think with a bit of good glassware.
And in hot weather, no. I mean, look at Rio. Those are the fun carnivals.
Yep.
When you can wear skimpy costumes and dance.
In January in Aruba, and they had a pre-carnival, and I quite enjoyed that. I didn't quite join the parade itself, but I was dancing on the sidelines.
Just very quickly for those of us who've not been to Trinidad, what happens at Carnival in Trinidad? I mean, you talked about sort of skimpy clothes.
Well, yes, you've got mass bands that dress up according to different themes, and it's a big thing. And even the people with sort of less access to money, they will set aside parts of their salaries to purchase one of these. They're very, very large sometimes, and they walk, and there are floats behind them, and then you've got steel bands playing, and they shut down. It's a national holiday, Monday and Tuesday, the Fat Tuesday and the Holy Monday or whatever it's called, non-Holy Monday.
Despite the current state of emergency.
Yes, clearly. What's more important, being safe or having fun?
Well, yeah,
and feathers,
exactly,
and sparkles.
Listen, there's a couple of topics that we wanted to still cover on this program, and that means we're going to extend for a short bit as well. Juliet, you don't have to get up to the mountains, do you? You can stick around for another 10-15 minutes after the news headlines.
Camerlengos, we've got to talk
stick
about
around. Rob Cox is also here as well. Emma Nelson, back in London, of course, much coming up today as well. You're going to have the news headlines for us in about a minute and 30 seconds time as well. And I guess also maybe having a few updates too. Of course, what has been happening. Of course, the Prime Minister is, Keir Starmer is off air right now, but we'll be catching up with you on that as well. So just stay tuned for an extended edition of Monocle on Sunday with me, Tyler Brûlé. We're back after the news headlines. Stay with us.
Première édition originale watch. The first Chanel timepiece, created in 1987 and inspired by the codes of the house. An octagonal case evoking the stopper of the No. 5 perfume bottle. A chain bracelet echoing the interlaced leather strap of the classic Chanel handbag. Première édition original watch, the quintessence of Chanel style and spirit.
It's 1900 in Tokyo, 11 a.m. in Berlin, 10 a.m. here in London, and 4 a.m. in Chicago. That's the time on Monocle Radio, brought to you by Chanel Watches. Hello from Midori House in London. It's Emma Nelson and you're with Monocle Weekends on Sunday the 2nd of March. In a moment we hand straight back to Dufourstrasse 90 for an extended episode of Monocle on Sunday. Our editorial director Tyler Brûlé is joined by his panellists both here and in London to continue with their analysis of the events of the last 48 hours. Speaking of which, a quick look now at the headlines. European leaders will gather at a summit in London today to discuss efforts to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky received a warm welcome from Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday, and today he holds a meeting with King Charles. Israel says it's accepted a Trump administration proposal for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. It will last for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish Passover holiday. And the Vatican has issued its morning health update on the Pope. The 88-year-old pontiff is stable, on oxygen, alert, in good humour and resting following a peaceful night. And people living near to Land's End in the United Kingdom have been advised to buy earplugs due to a lighthouse's broken fog alarm. Longship's lighthouse has been sounding a loud beep every 13 seconds for the last week. The National Coastwatch Institution has said the horn has been sounding all day and all night. And those are the headlines. Back to you, Tyler, in Dufourstrasse 90.
Emma, thanks very much for that. Did we find this horn? Do we have can we have a sound up or no?
Yes, we can. I just need to warn you, it's possibly a little underwhelming.
Okay. Well, yeah, but if it goes off every 13 seconds, I guess it gets annoying anyway. Let's have a listen.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds like you left the car door open or something. I don't know what all the fuss is about. Anyway.
Well, it sounds as if, I don't know, my washing machine does that once it's got to the end of its cycle, and it annoys the heck out of me. So I can imagine that happening for an entire week, day and night, might be, well, I'm not sure that there's some horrible sort of torture people somewhere just thinking, oh yes, we'll just drive them to Land's End if they want to make them have a bad time.
Rob Cox is here. He's looking a bit cross-eyed. I was like, Rob, is that going to sort of scare any super tankers away from the rocks? I don't think so.
I mean, I don't think so. It is going to keep a few neighbors up, and after a certain point, they're going to, I can see the pitchforks coming out. It does, but it sounds like an appliance. It's exactly what I thought. It's like we have this thing called a bimby in our house. And
a what?
It's Roberta's bimby, and it makes risottos and all this stuff, but it goes on and it just keeps beeping. And if you don't get up and like turn it off, I'm not sure. Is that an intelligent appliance or is it just?
Well, listeners, you're back for just a slightly extended version of Monocle on Sunday. Eemeli Isoaho is here, program coordinator in peace mediation at ETH. Juliet Linley, regular correspondent, also Vatican expert as well. Rob Cox. Andrew Tuck was in London earlier, then he came back. I think he had to go also have a bit of a wardrobe moment as well. Andrew, you're with us too, I believe.
I'm here, Tyler. I'm full feathers.
Good, very, very good to hear. Liz, I just want to spend maybe these next few minutes just maybe looking ahead. We've talked and reflected a lot about what, of course, has happened in Washington, and then we have this very busy day, of course, in London, and of course, Brussels is firing up as well. Eemeli, just from your perch, your expertise in this territory, what does a good outcome look like? Is this the day, or at least over the next 24 hours? As I was saying, in my column today, this is really a step up moment, because I think one of the things it's great to have a lot of leaders sitting there on X and making comments on a Friday evening. But we've seen the power of television in all of this. We've seen, as Rob said, this is a ratings moment. Now, we're not going to have maybe that type of drama, but is there ceremony? Is there, and whether it's number 10, whether it's at the Elysee, wherever it is, this sort of sense of unity for the cameras, question and answers, talking to the press. Do we need to see this, or should something else happen?
So I think we're playing catch up, quite frankly. I think for the past 3 years, we've in a way hidden behind our kind of unwavering support to Ukraine, and that has come at the cost of us thinking about, okay, what might a realistic peace plan mean? So I think this disruptor of a meeting from Friday, the silver lining hopefully is that it forces European leaders and also leaders beyond Europe to, one, come to the realization that is peace in the way we want really possible through the battlefield? Probably not. Second, so what does that mean then? What kind of a realistic plan can we put forward beyond just talking the talk of, yes, we need to support Ukraine? So I'm hoping, I'm not super hopeful, but I'm hoping that this functions as a disruptor of sorts, and there will be some really concrete measures, be it boots on the ground or other concrete security measures that our European leaders are willing to entertain at least, and then flesh out a proper process for the way forward. Again, quoting our president of Finland from his interview yesterday, trying to come up with ad hoc agreements left, right and center without seeing the big picture will only do so good. So you need to have a bit the longer term view in mind.
Maybe Rob and Juliet, also as Italian experts as well. Rob, do you have a sense of how much maneuvering and when we look to Giorgia Meloni's team as well, do they see that they really have a hand to play in this, and also how this sort of plays into the bigger sort of brand Italy story? Not maybe the singular leadership role in Europe, but they've got some real skin in the game.
Well, she certainly was the only European leader to go to Mar-a-Lago and see him before the inauguration. She was at the inauguration. She's part of that sort of the European wing of MAGA, if you will. So and he says things like, she's a great leader,
fantastic
all this kind of stuff, fantastic lady. Leader. So, there's certainly a relationship there that can be leveraged in some way, shape, or form to say, hey, look, Donald, like, we need to, and she has. A lot of my friends in Italy are upset that she hasn't said enough. She actually has said she's played it cool, and I think honestly, I'm not sure that that's a bad hand in this moment. You can come out as the opposition to Donald Trump, but you can see how far that gets you.
Yeah, I mean, she has said, I know how to, io so come lavorare con Trump, no? And she also says she knows how she can get Zelensky maybe to ricucire, to sew up relations. But this is Trump, and come on, he's had so many misogynistic moments. I really do worry that he's going to look at this Italian lady and just trample all over her when the moment comes. And again, remember, the old diplomatic adage, if you are a bridge, remember that people can also walk all over you. That's what worries me about Meloni.
And you do have to also, Italy does not spend 2% of its GDP on military. It's quite baloney. And it's not able to, it can't just sort of snap its fingers and get there. It has a huge trade surplus to the United States. So just on the metrics, it's not a great bargaining position. So,
Andrew Tuck in London, our editor-in-chief, again, is this also a bit of a brand Britain moment as well? Spotlight. Looks like the sun is out in London, which is wonderful to see as well. Obviously, we have Prime Minister Starmer stepping up. London convening these conversations. I'm looking at one of the monitors right now. Vehicles rolling up. Obviously, leaders arriving in London right now. do you think this, like Team Starmer, because we have to be thinking about who's in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the advisory team around him to lead this? Easy question, yes or not. Can the PM go the distance on this one?
Well, he's in a strong position for lots of reasons. Macron is weakened at home. It feels like the last days for the French president, unfortunately. In Germany, we have a changing of the guard, but it's not Merz who's coming to London, it's Scholz. And that's a shame, because actually it's Merz who's going to need to kind of step up and decide what happens here. So actually, he's in position. He's in position for several years, and he's also just seen Trump. So he is in a very strong position today, and I think actually there's a new willingness for all European leaders to play a bit nicer with each other. So it comes at a very good time. He's been on this interview this morning on the BBC, and it's already made headlines because he said that he was asked, does he trust Donald Trump over a lasting peace in Ukraine? And he said, yeah, I do trust him. He wouldn't talk about what that would entail. He didn't talk about the defence that would need to be put in to Ukraine to support that. But he said, I do trust him. And he said, it wasn't great what happened on Friday, but actually Zelensky's not done anything wrong here. We need to support Ukraine. So I would imagine that he would not have said those things unless there had been some go-between Washington and London already ahead of today. This isn't happening in a vacuum. There'll have been some to and fro. So maybe on all sides, even though there's still posturing, that people realise that something has to happen here, that there has to be a coming together, even if you want to acquiesce with many of the things that the Russians want in the case of Trump, you still have to talk to each other. So hopefully Starmer is in a strong position today.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, just looking at Le Figaro's just reporting now, it says that UK and France work with Kiev on plan to stop fighting. So yeah, both of course Macron and Starmer wanting to take this leadership role in this. Eemeli, I want to bring you in.
No, and maybe just to note that Starmer has, I think, one kind of piece of ammunition he has in his back pocket is his national security advisor, Jonathan Powell, who was personally involved in the Good Friday Agreement for Northern Ireland, and who really knows negotiations and how they work. So in terms of technical expertise he has on hand, it's definitely there, which might not be the case, at least at that level, when you look at Washington. But again, it will be geopolitics and political dynamics that will play a role in defining where will subsequent talks take place. But at least in terms of the shoulders that Keir Starmer has behind him, they're relatively broad when it comes to expertise on these kinds of negotiations.
I want to bring in our senior news editor, Chris Chermak. He's in London. Chris, of course, this is going to create a busy day for you, and of course a busy week ahead as well. But maybe from your perch, how you're observing things, and yeah, obviously what we're seeing unfold in London right now.
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear the conversations. Maybe a couple of things to pick up on. One, maybe picking up off of Andrew there, I think what's interesting with Donald Trump is this point that even with everything that happened on Friday, you saw reports in the US out of the media, the Washington Post and others, saying everything was ready for a deal with Zelensky, right? And I do think that's important to remember, because that is a sign that this isn't necessarily something where Donald Trump was, determined to undermine Zelensky and will never push back from that and will look back towards peace and reaching some kind of deal. So I do think there is some room still there, and it's going to be interesting to watch whether Zelensky and Trump can at any point get back on the same page. And the other thing that has struck me from the conversation, also looking at London, this was mentioned a little bit, but isn't it surprising how little we've been talking about Germany throughout this show? There is going to be a changeover there. It is particularly awkward here in London that it is the Chancellor Olaf Scholz who is there and not the Chancellor in waiting, Friedrich Merz. The last time there was a changeover in Germany between Scholz and Merkel, Angela Merkel brought Olaf Scholz along for some of these meetings. So that's something that's going to have to be sorted out. But I do think Friedrich Merz is somebody who is, something of a force to be reckoned with at the point where he does get into the leadership in Germany. Leadership in Germany has fallen pretty dramatically under Olaf Scholz. That's why, frankly, we're not talking about Germany in this moment very much. But, Merz is a transatlanticist, so he does have that on his side, but he is also making this very clear point that he wants to be the person to help Europe stand up on its own and in order to sort of talk to Donald Trump as equals. He wants to get that process started. He's called it his top priority when I was in Berlin for the elections last weekend. And it'll be really interesting, I think, to see whether he can pull that off, what kind of leader he is going to be in Europe. Because as you've been talking about on this show throughout, Europe needs some kind of leader. It is lacking in leadership. Who is that going to be? I do think Friedrich Merz will have some role to play there.
Chris Cermak, thanks for that. Just for our listeners, we're going to take this to the bottom of the hour. It's just 14 minutes past 11 here in Zurich. Andrew, I want to bring you in just on this topic. So let's say we move to seeing something that resembles European leadership in this. Does that also then bring about a reset? So, of course, getting, NATO members to get above 2%, just to get serious about arming themselves properly, a more toothsome Europe, if you could say. Let's say that scenario unfolds. But I'm wondering how much does that also become a bit of an economic reset? Not just because, yes, you have arms and aircraft manufacturers and shipyards mobilized, and of course all of the ecosystem that is around that. When we think about, of course, what that means for the digital sector and beyond. But are we looking at a broader, bigger, and what we're talking about is maybe economic reset here as well?
Well, you'd hope so, because one of the reasons that Europe has failed to deliver this percentage is because the economies have been so stuttering, and we've seen a Germany that has just not performed as it did back in the 80s and 90s, seen as weak. The French economy not as strong as it should have been, and certainly here in the UK, the feeble growth that we have, it just hasn't been commensurate with adding extra spending to defence. There has been this commitment, so it has to come from somewhere. There's always a bit of a complicated equation, because, yes, you hope that by buying armaments and commissioning new warships and bringing more men and women into the armed forces, that you do see a gain for the economy. But then you look at somewhere where, like Russia, where we keep on seeing these slightly positive and strange figures coming out about how well the economy is doing. But it's just because it's manufacturing arms. The rest of the economy is completely stuttering along. So you don't want to become dependent on it either. But I think there is a sweet spot there, Tyler. As you know well, we often look at defence in great detail in Monocle. And we've always felt that there is a really important story here to tell about society and what Europe needs to do and global influence. And I think that this is the point where we can actually be a bit more confident about rearming in a wise and sensible way.
Rob, I just let's stay on this track a little bit as well, because I can of course bring in other people around the table who are from countries that are famous for their long summer holidays, the Italians, the Finns, etc. Andrew, and join in as well. We just came back from this big tour in the Middle East. You're in the UAE. You just see things just firing up. Everybody is there, and I say everybody, but people even from the US who are completely connected, of course, to all sorts of capital are there to talk to, of course, the right leadership, because they want to get their startups up and running. They're in their third, fourth round of raising money, and that's where they're going. And then in tandem with that, you sort of see the world starting to show up. It starts to remind you a little bit of Singapore 20 years ago, that they're building it, people will come. And then, of course, you go to Singapore as well, and Singapore is motoring along. And you have something happening on that side of the world. And a lot of it is just, there's capital, but it comes because there's also hard work. I mean, okay, you could argue, of course, in the Emirates, a lot of it, of course, is under the sand as well. But they're, of course, doing much to mitigate that. Do we have to get back to work here as well? Because we see a shrinking work week in Europe, everyone, wanting to work 50%, 60%. And then at the same time, everyone's sort of scratching their head saying, why does America continue to motor ahead?
Yeah, I'm not one to argue for the 3-day work week, although it does sound enticing. But I'm also not, I lived in Japan in 1990. You saw that people were killing themselves with work, and you still see in places like South Korea that the work-life balance does not exist. There's got to be somewhere in the middle, right? It is true, there is a view, let's put it this way, a perception that Europe is sort of, well, once I've made my money, the best place to go is to Europe and live it, right? I can make my money in America, Singapore, and the Emirates, but then, of course, I can relax and live well in Europe. I think that's a problem for Europe. I mean, clearly we see it. The dynamism of the economies of Europe is really problematic. It makes it difficult for whether it is moving up defense spending to 2% or 3% to answer a call that's not just a Donald Trump call. It's a question of what are you going to do in a world where these kinds of things require you to do it, and all of a sudden you can't because you've made these commitments to have these 3-day work weeks and lots of social spending. Look, but what's the way around that? I mean, you can't take these things away. It's like Turkey's voting for Thanksgiving. No politician wants to be the one who goes out and says, "Okay, we're going to cut." You're not. I mean, even look in France. I mean, try to raise the retirement age properly. Try to pull back on any of these things. It doesn't happen because the entrenched democracies are so strong.
Yeah, that may be the case, but as you said, and it was interesting just talking to some people last night at a dinner party about the very point you're making. Europe is Disneyland, and this is, of course, a place that people want to vacation, that they want to retire, etc. But if we don't have a secure Europe, I mean, not a lot of bad things happen at Disneyland. Maybe occasionally people fall out of a roller coaster or something, but they keep a pretty tight lid on things, and I don't think we're quite Disneyland. So we can say we can.
I wonder what security spending is a percentage of
I think that's a great story. I think that is we're talking probably over 15% of entry price. And Andrew, maybe just come in on this as well. And Rob talks about we're having to meet in the middle on this. Do we reach a tipping point where actually things simply, with all the AI and all of the support around the world, we just can't get things done across 30 hours across a week, whatever it may be. It's no longer working for Europe, and especially when we see Asian economies, in proper growth, where we see 5 to 6% growth, and also that places also become attractive for people to migrate to as well.
Tyler, our feeling that that we believe that work can be enjoyable and valuable, and that coming together in teams and to share ideas and resources is the way ahead. I think that there are so many unknowns at the moment that many governments are beginning to reflect on what happens if AI does sweep away so many jobs. If you look what's happening in the US with Elon Musk and Doge, that I think people think that many of the jobs that he's getting rid of is because he thinks they can just simply be done by AI. I was reading in Virginia alone, 100,000 people have lost their jobs in the last 4 weeks. Now, what do those people do? There has to be a new belief in manufacturing, in making things, in using your hands. In fact, a good story here in the papers today about how in the US there is a return now in many schools to the idea of learning a trade, that is beginning to come back. So it's a tricky moment, because if people are going to lose their jobs in that amount of time, then maybe somebody does have to begin to look at how the work pattern is, and maybe some people will be working only 3 days a week in the future. But I don't think it's going to happen as fast as people imagine. And I do think that you think back of all of these epic changes when the typewriter disappeared from the office and there wasn't a secretary anymore. Those people still found other jobs, and industry changed, and there was always a demand for workers. So we'll see. But you're definitely right to say is that when you go to Asia, when you go to the Middle East, this passion for work and for working hard and doing things fast and giving it your all is extraordinary. It does help if you don't pay tax.
That's also an added benefit as well. Eemeli, just before we go, I just want to bring you in on this. Would there be a revolution in Finland if they said, look, people have to maybe buckle down a little bit more in the month of July? I mean, even if we say, let's face it. Also, Finland has quite a significant defense sector. People like to think about a very sort of peaceful country, known for nice furniture and Moomins, and of course good design and a bit of paper as well. But there's shipbuilding, there's an aircraft sector, and there's certainly an armament sector as well in the country.
Absolutely, and we build kind of icebreakers as well. And I mean, I think the Finnish leaders are always very adamant about pointing out that we're a net contributor to European security, but also there's a lot potential in terms of transatlantic collaboration. And I think what Europe needs to is struggling with is one is we quite poor at our messaging, but we also slow. So if you look at, for instance, defense spending, it has gone up quite drastically over the past 10 years. I think 2014, when the invasion of Crimea happened, I think it was only 3 or 4 NATO countries that reached the 2% target. Now it's over 20 countries that have reached that milestone. Again, now we have discussions whether 2% is enough, whether it should look more like 5%, but I don't think we're communicating that efficiently enough. And I think it's a slow ship, Europe, and it has started moving, but perhaps not as nimbly as we would like. And I don't think, to Rob's earlier point, there's no one clear leader who could, have those clear talking points. But maybe in the future, the same way during COVID, the EU managed to come up with recovery funds, etc. We can carve out some kind of EU-wide packages for investing in key sectors, be it quantum computing, AI, that are good for defense, but also serve an economic purpose.
Andrew, Emma, we don't have cameras in studio, at least not yet, so you can't see this, but just on the topic of leadership, I want you that since the start of this program, Juliet started the program looking like, sort of a Tiroler, sort of, Tiroler nobility. She now looks like a Tuareg because she's fashioned something amazing with her pashmina or something. I don't know if she thinks that, the old pipes are going to, freeze up or something, but it's a remarkable
But I thought we were going to talk about the Vatican's defense spending, but we just don't have time right now.
No, we don't have. Do we know actually how much they spend on their Swiss Guard and security? It can't be insignificant.
It can't be insignificant. I mean, imagine just on costumes.
Right.
Right.
I mean, those pantaloons need some starching or some type of engineering support as well. Rob, just before we let you head back to Rome, crystal ball time. What are we going to see? Of course, as Andrew was saying earlier, none of this is happening in isolation. Of course, there are conversations. At least one would hope there are conversations between London, Brussels, Washington, Paris. We must assume that. Everyone sort of settles on it in Washington. And is it also what we've seen as well? Just like Trump moves on. I mean, of course, he was called out on, the notion that he'd said that, of course, only last week that Zelensky, or 2 weeks ago now, that Zelensky was a dictator. And then he says, I don't recall saying that.
Yeah,
and is it going to be the same thing on a Monday morning now as well? We could be up for a totally different type of reset.
I think attention is the coin of the realm, and the one concern I have is that this kind of this is sort of like reminding me of Back to the Future. You had like Biff, the bully, and like his crew, and they were going after Marty McFly's dad, and it was just this bullying. And the problem is it works, right? So if it gets that attention, if it wins the ratings, if it looks like it works, and then everyone comes in there supplicating, I mean, then we have a whole new world of pretty precarious diplomacy, with the United States. That is my concern, that we're all talking about it. He's won the ratings battle, and that is really what matters most for him. At the same time, I mean, with regards to Ukraine, yes, I think some compromise will emerge. Some proxy will have to get in there and to make it work. There'll be a beautiful minerals deal. All of those things will happen. But I think the longer term, this is just, if this is how it works, then it's going to be pretty. It's going to be really hard to plan out.
Well, I just very quickly before we go, but does this also open the floodgates as well for just bad behavior? Can of course save the day. Does this also become, because this is kind of bullying boardroom behavior that you've seen. This is not entirely new. It's just sort of come out of the world stage. And does that also, this is what sort of new corporate life is going to look like.
I mean, it's a new normal, right? This maybe we'd never seen the Oval Office used in this way. It's probably been used in some pretty terrible ways, lots of different ways. But I mean, this was on full display. Again, does it embolden this kind of behavior in the future? That to me is the concern.
Andrew, it means there's probably room for at least maybe the Monocle School for Good Manners for boys and girls.
Well, I think we talked to each other on Friday about this briefly. Just etiquette and manners, and And there is a role for diplomacy, and some of these things should just be going on behind the scenes. We don't need to see all of this tussling in public because it hasn't really kind of resulted in anything positive yet. Let's hope it does. But yeah, I think good manners is the way ahead.
Eemeli, is that maybe a new side hustle for your people at ETH as well? I mean, to not just function in a public sector format, because it is a bit of a fear that this is like the new way that companies are going to speak to each other. This is how deals are potentially won. Though what we saw on display was, more something which is from a reality TV show.
Absolutely, and I would second the point. Actually, I hope that we will see less in the future. There will be fewer of these extremely long in front of the press conversations taking place at the Oval Office. I hope we go a bit more back to behind closed door settings and then see snippets here and there. But yes, time will only tell.
We're going to have to leave it there. Rob Cox, very nice to see you. Eemeli as well. Juliet Linley in Tuareg drag, also looking fantastic. Also thanks to Chris Cermak and who else do we have? Natalie Theodosi, Guy de Launey as well, and our very own Christopher Lord. Our show is produced by Desiree Bentley here in Zurich, and also we had Alan Whedon and also Chris Cermak looking after the desk back in London. Emma Nelson is here. Thanks for joining us for the special extended edition. More from us next week. Have a good week. Bye-bye.